Good evening and welcome. My name is Vinita Sundaram, and it is my pleasure to be chairing this event. So, over to our speakers. It is my greatest pleasure to introduce Nancy Lindisfarne, who is an anthropologist and who previously studied and taught at SOAS University of London in the UK. Her most recent book, written with Richard Tapper, is Afghan Village Voices. Jonathan Neale is a historian and professional writer. His most recent book is Fight the Fire: Green New Deals and Global Climate Jobs. We are absolutely delighted that Nancy and Jonathan are going to talk to us today about their book, Why Men: A Human History of Violence and Inequality, in which they explore how humans, a species that evolved to be cooperative and egalitarian, developed societies of enforced inequality. Why did our ancestors create patriarchal power and warfare? Did it have to be this way? Nancy and Jonathan will discuss the privileges humans claim, how they rationalize them, and how we unpick those ideas about our roots. I can't wait to hear more. Nancy and Jonathan, it's over to you.
Great. Vanessa, thank you very, very much. Hello, welcome everybody. I'm Nancy Lindisfarne. This is Jonathan Neale. And we are honored to be participating in the York Festival of Ideas. And we're delighted that Why Men, the book, is out and in the world, and we're here today to tell you a bit about it. Why Men: A Human History of Violence and Inequality is about love. And it's about our human disposition to fairness and equality. We're social animals, and we love. We need love to survive. But paradoxically, we also write about how our capacity for kindness and empathy can imprison us in ruthless competition and violent hierarchies. And there's another twist. It is our disposition to fairness and love that fuels our resistance to inequality. Love explains why ordinary people like ourselves resent and resist inequality. We hate lies. We hate corruption. We hate nepotism. We don't like unfairness. And these contradictions are at the center of all of our lives. And exploring these contradictions is actually at the center of the book.
And Why Men is also a deliberate and direct challenge to the dominant ideas in popular culture about evolution. We are arguing against the big boy theories of human evolution. Those are the versions of evolution promulgated by Steven Pinker, Jared Diamond, E.O. Wilson, Yuval Harari, and many others. They're the kinds of theories that go under the names of sociobiology or evolutionary psychology. And you all know all these ideas already. The idea that men are naturally violent, that all people are naturally greedy and selfish, and that the driving force of human evolution is that men compete to dominate other men, so that we can have more sex with more women in order to pass on our genes. But our fight with Pinker and company is not that they are politically conservative, although they are politically conservative.
And misogynist.
Our fight with Pinker and company is that what they write is bad science. Let me explain. When Wilson and Pinker and other evolutionary psychologists write about primates, baboons or lemurs, or ants for that matter, they mostly read the relevant science, and they're mostly reliable. When they write about human society, they don't do the reading. They don't read the history, and especially they won't read the social science. Instead, they make things up on the basis of prejudices that they learned behind the bike sheds in secondary school. It's sloppy work, and there's also an important problem of method. Sociobiologists and evolutionary psychologists don't compare the whole complex ecological adaptation of, say, bonobos with human adaptations. What we're doing here, we're using an important idea from biology. It's the idea of adaptation. It means something specific. It means that you take into account everything, the ecology and the environment in which the species live, how they get their food, what they eat, who they eat with, the kind of societies they have, what hierarchies they live with, how territories are marked out, how they communicate with each other, how they raise their young, how they protect themselves from predators and rivals. You take together the whole shebang. But what many evolutionary psychologists do is they take just one aspect of animal behavior in one animal and compare it with a single aspect of human behavior. In doing this, they automatically take things out of context. For instance, it's like comparing vulva to vulva sex between two bonobos with sex between two upper-class professional women in San Francisco in the 1980s. They live in utterly different social hierarchies. These, or worse, it's they will rely on studies done by psychologists among males at Yale or Stanford to argue that all humans are competitive and cruel, instead of arguing that men at Yale and Stanford are competitive and cruel.
Right. So what we're offering is a feminist ecology. And we are very careful with our comparisons. And we look at our complex adaptation as humans. And we pay particular attention to examples of friendship and fairness and equality as a counter, as a balance to the mainstream emphases and the dominant ideas in the media today about hierarchy and male violence and aggression. Problem is, or the difference is, that the adaptations of most of our primate cousins, so gorillas, baboons, chimps, involve a great deal of inequality reinforced in many ways. And our adaptation as human beings is different. We developed something really quite exceptional. And we tell this story then in 3 acts, in terms of 3 human adaptations. The first one in the book is about the evolution of early humans. The second is about the invention of agriculture and the coming of class societies. And we anticipate a third adaptation associated with climate change. Our starting point is the absolutely remarkable science that has been coming out for the last 20 or so years, from primatologists, studies of early human evolution, forensic archaeology. There are amazing new technologies around DNA, around LIDAR. There are microanalyses of pollen, of bits of food, of feces. It is the case that scientists can now tell you more or less what people living in a cave shelter 40,000 years ago had for breakfast. The science is remarkable. And in this respect, if you haven't investigated this or don't have a feel for it, I'd recommend a book by Martin Jones. It's called Feast, and it's an excellent way to see how much people can know now. It's wonderful. What this new science is showing us is that we became human by becoming equal. And let me repeat this. We became human by becoming equal.
Okay. What we see from all this new science is that many changes came together to produce this new adaptation of equality. 7 are of particular importance. First, proto-humans moved out from the forest onto the savanna, the plains of Africa. And most primates live mostly on leaves or fruit. But early humans invented the digging stick to dig in the ground for tubers like potatoes and yams. This was new for primates, and this was a big breakthrough. Second, proto-humans also invented tools for ambush hunting. Ambush hunting is a particular kind of hunting that makes us different from lions or cheetahs or whatever. Proto-humans would sneak up on big animals and wound them with a weapon, a spear, an arrow, a poison dart, a boomerang, and then chase them down. This too was a big breakthrough. like the digging stick, and it is associated with an interesting division of labor. From our near contemporary hunters and gatherers, the records we have in the Kalahari, the Congo, the Amazon, Australia, what we know is that it was almost always men who did the ambush hunting of big game, for one pretty obvious reason, that to do with babies crying and scaring off the animals you were trying to sneak up on. And both men and women hunted smaller animals and birds and dug for tubers and collected fruit.
Those are the first two changes. The third bit of our adaptation, which is of great importance, was that humans brought the tubers and the meat to some home place, and they used fire to cook it. And then, and this is the important bit, they shared the food with the whole band. They had to share the food. This was their insurance, because the supply of tubers and fruits was steady, but the ambush hunting failed most of the time. So everyone sharing the meat and veg every day meant that the young could eat and grow. Men and women both became better nourished, and there was food enough for the old people too. And this is why they needed this division of labor, so that they could reliably get staple tubers every day and meat on some days.
And here's a very important point to wrap your minds around. It's not easy because it goes against everything we know from the stereotypes and ideas we have from our own society. But the division of labor and the sharing of foodstuffs among early humans actually allowed men and women to become more equal. Now, in our world today, we just automatically assume that people who did different jobs should be rewarded differently. Obviously, doctors should be paid more than hospital cleaners. Obviously. Some jobs are rewarded better than others. This inequality is deep in our way of thinking. And what we're saying, it may seem counterintuitive, because in the case of early humans, the opposite was true. The division of labor actually allowed men and women to share food and to become more equal. If you look at our close relatives, the chimpanzees, say, or the gorillas, there's a lot of inequality between males and females, and males and female chimps and gorillas all get their food in exactly the same way. They all do exactly the same work. And it was when we had a division of labor that we stopped being unequal and became equal.
And had better food. That's the important bit.
Yeah.
There's a fourth point in the adaptation. It is pretty clear that early humans, like our near contemporary hunters and gatherers, shared childcare. And this is also very different from other primates. Among the other primates, mothers keep their infants very, very close to them at all time, because males are infanticiders, whatever the word is. Infanticide by males is common. Males are dangerous. Among humans, males do not kill infants. If there is infanticide, if it is necessary, it is done by the mother. Now, what this means is that women can leave their children with their dads, with grandpa, with grandma as well, and with neighbors and with older kids. And the mother can go out and work to get food on the plains. And following with this is another thing that changes between primates and ourselves, and that is human women live well past menopause, and old people, like both women and men, are cherished, not only as good grandbabysitters, but also because they're respected for their experience and their wisdom. And obviously this comes in with the creation of culture and language and so forth and so on. In other words, we don't lose what we've actually invented, what we've learned about the environment.
You doing that one?
Oh, I'll do next, yeah. Right, this is our sixth adaptation, or aspect of adaptation, that early humans shared sexual joy. And here too, we are saying something new. Humans differ from other primates. We have sex all year round, not just when females are ovulating. The sex act itself often lasts much longer, and human genitals have changed in many ways to make sex better. Human penises, for instance, are user-friendly. We know this from a very splendidly titled book by Cormier and Jones called A Domesticated Penis. And female anatomy, too, has changed in a number of ways to make sex much more pleasurable. And indeed, in Why Men, in the book, we have a very fun chapter on the mystery of the female orgasm. So what we're suggesting in that chapter and throughout the book is that shared similar sexual joy also made men and women more equal. And gay sex also tied humans together with love as well.
But here comes the sixth point.
Seventh,
You're right, seventh point. All this equality and sharing did not come easily, because humans have not lost that primate potential for inequality, for dominance, for hierarchy and submission. Primatologists usually focus on domination. However, the wonderful primatologist Frans de Waal, who died recently and is so much missed, he writes of humans as submissive apes. What he means is it's not that dominance competition comes naturally to us, not that we're centrally concerned with domination, but that, like other primates, submission comes naturally to us. And the implication here is of great importance, because becoming equal involved not only some genetic and bodily changes in humans, it was something that humans constantly worked at and created over and over, day after day. We know this from all the studies of near contemporary hunters and gatherers. They demanded sharing. They pestered each other to share all the time. They hated unfairness. And there was another crucial problem that with ambush hunting as an important source of meat. If you remember your time in secondary school in athletics or games, you remember that some kids have good hand-eye coordination, the speed, the agility, the energy to be really good at hockey or football or hunting. And some of us don't. And this is true of hunter-gatherers as well. In any community, only a few of the strongest and most athletic men brought home the majority of the big game for the whole band. In a band which included, say, 10 men, maybe 2 or 3 would bring back most of the meat. And if humans had behaved the way that chimps do, those successful hunters would have gotten most of the meat and be better nourished, while weak and younger animals and old animals ate much less well and would even go hungry. So not only do all the near contemporary hunter-gatherers we know of have rules for sharing food, they also, as the Australians say, they cut down the tall poppies. The bullying of our primate heritage survived, but humans consciously shamed bullies. They shunned bullies. And if it was necessary, they killed the bullies who wouldn't share. And so, compared with our closest primate cousins like chimps and gorillas, early humans were able to live longer, eat better, become bigger-brained, and have lots of consensual sex all year round. And they were able to take down the bullies. Old people, like us, were respected, and children were cherished and looked after by everyone in the community. All these things together were part of an ecological adaptation that evolved over hundreds of thousands of years and enabled a puny ape like us on the savannah to feed, to raise healthy children, to multiply, and then suddenly spread across the whole world with remarkable speed about 80,000 years ago.
Da-dung. And then comes Act 2, the second great human adaptation. Act 2 began much more recently, around 12,000 years ago, when human beings all around the world, quite independently, began to invent agriculture. mostly grain agriculture, and wherever it turned up, there was the possibility of inequality of class societies emerging. Now, this association between agriculture and class hierarchies is certainly not new. It's been known for a very long time, because the reasons, in fact, of the connection are very easy to see. Unlike hunters and gatherers who have very few possessions and who can run off if they need to, farmers are invested in the land they work. They're invested in the harvest that they depend on for their food, and they're invested in the seed corn that they need for the coming year. So what happens is that farmers are stuck on the land, and anyone who wants to take advantage of the farmers or to eat the food that they've worked so hard to produce needs only to organize a band of thugs to pounce on those farmers, to steal their grain, to force them to pay taxes, or perhaps even to steal or sell their children into slavery. And bands of thugs, when they get together to build a new kind of society, guess what? Guess what we call it? We call it civilization. Up to you.
But before we jump the gun, we have got to say that there's no automatic connection between agriculture and the rise of class societies. There's no immediate connection. In some places, more than 1,000 years elapsed between the invention of agriculture and the emergence of class divisions. In many other places, there was a continuous struggle between a ruling class, which might dominate a population for 100 or 200 years, until they were brought down. Sometimes they were brought down by natural disaster, sometimes by a competing group of thugs, but very often they were brought down by the farmers and the craftspeople whose labor they exploited. And when that happened, however it happened, there often followed a long period of equality. Those long periods of equality in history are always referred to by historians as the Dark Ages. And there's a marvelous book by the archaeologists Kent Flannery and Joyce Marcus. It's called The Creation of Inequality. And it offers an excellent introduction to these back and forth struggles across the world over thousands of years.
So, to be very clear, what we're saying is that while agriculture makes dividing people into economic classes possible, it's not enough to do it on its own. The inequalities of class societies depend on two further things. The first is ideology, and the second concerns violence. But violence is alone, by itself, is never enough to hold inequality in place.
Every ruling class needs a set of ideas that allow them to hang on to their privileges, their wealth, their security, their power. Elites everywhere have, from the top down, sought to divide and rule the people below who might challenge them. And all kinds of racism do this job very well. Skin color can do this job, white skins versus black or brown. Cultural divides also work, language works, sectarianism works wonderfully well. Catholics against Protestants, Christians against Muslims, and on and on and on. All these are ways of creating an us and a them. But what we are saying in our book, and we think this is new, is that gender divisions do that job best because they're unique in that they divide us from the people we love and the people who love us. They divide us from the people whose love and respect we most need.
They divide us from us. This happens because we learn about gendered inequality at our mother's knee. We are divided by gender before we're born, in our parents' wish for a boy or a girl. From the very moment you see that first scan, as infants, little boys and little girls are treated very differently, and gender differences are marked and exaggerated in a million ways. And we learned about these gender differences from the ways our parents raise us, from the ways our parents behave towards each other, and of course, from the ways other parents, other people, treat our parents. So it's our parents who teach us how to be a proper little man, a very good little girl, and we are taught, in effect, that we have pink and blue brains, and we embody these differences that we've been taught in our very being, in our very souls. And this is the catch-22. We've called these traps love knots. They're the kind of places where we're caught and we're tied in knots. And because we learn these ideas of inequality through love of our parents, our friends, our lovers, it's very, very difficult to see beyond the stereotypes and to fight and resist these ideas and habits of inequality. Who picks up the children from school? Who washes the dishes? Every single thing. Who's on top in bed? You know, the whole lot is unequal. So elites, what we're saying, have everywhere understood that making a very big deal about differences between men and women is the most effective ideological trick that they can play on us and keep themselves in power. Through love, we buy into the idea of inequality. We submit to the thugs. We don't challenge the people in palaces. We kowtow to the people who rule the world. And this is one of the central contradictions of all of our lives.
And wherever you look back in history, in ancient China or Mesopotamia or Mesoamerica, elite rulers everywhere have understood from the very beginning of class societies that the very best way to naturalize inequality of every kind is through inequalities of gender. By marking the differences between men and women, by exaggerating them. What this does is it doesn't just create divisions between women and men, it makes inequality of all kinds seem natural, makes them seem God-given. It's a way of making inequality seem like something that is innate inside us, something that can't be challenged. And when inequality is made to seem so natural, we don't ask, why do some people live in palaces and others are homeless on the street? We don't ask, why do some people have plenty to eat and others starve?
Mm-hmm.
Or why do some people live in luxury while others can't keep themselves warm?
The details differ, but wherever we find class inequality, there is gendered inequality as well. And with class inequality come patriarchal domination, cults of male violence, the whole show. And from the very get-go, from the earliest histories we have, from Gilgamesh in the ancient Middle East to the Mahabharata, to the early myths of China, and from the Americas, wherever there's class inequality, there is gendered inequality too. And the consistency of this association is extraordinary. And in seeing this and in saying this, we are saying something new.
But there's an important rule of thumb to keep in mind here. That rule of thumb is the greater the inequality, the more violence is required to keep that inequality in place. That's what we're seeing at Gaza. And moreover, class inequality requires class violence, and sexual inequality requires sexual violence. And the two of them are invariably intertwined, and they're intertwined with whatever mix of racial and ethnic divisions are there too. And here's the paradox. In this paradox lies the answer to our question, why men? Or to put it differently, why in class societies is most violence done by men? And our answer is that two things come together with the coming of agriculture. One is the determination of elites to make inequality seem natural. And the second is that elites need violence to keep that inequality in place. So,
what is important here is that compared with most of our primate cousins, there is only a slight difference in size between human men and human women. The average is about 15% difference in weight between men and women. It's not very much, but this degree of gender dimorphism is there. And so if you're disposed to be a bully and to bully families of farmers or steal their crops, who would you recruit to be your hench people? Who would you seek out to be your thugs, your enforcers? You would turn to those men who are bigger and stronger than women and other men, the ones who know how to handle weapons. And you would teach those men to be ruthless, to be aggressive, to be deadly. And they would learn these things if they wanted to keep their jobs. Violence and aggression are what army conscripts, what professional soldiers are taught, and indeed what they have to learn in boot camp, from ferocious drill sergeants and weapons drills and combat training. They need to learn these lessons well if they are to have any chance at all of coming home alive. In class societies, violence is something men learn. And in class societies, violence is something men have to be taught.
and everywhere through the history of class societies, there have been dominant mainstream ideologies, like the set of ideas offered by Pinker and Harari and the evolutionary psychologists.
Or Homer.
Or Homer.
Or Gilgamesh.
Or Gilgamesh. These are ideologies that mark sharp differences between men and women. These are presented as categorical differences, as black and white. They want us to believe and act as if men are from Mars and women are from Venus. Mars and Venus. They are telling us that the differences between men and women are biological and fixed and genetic and planetary.
But again, let's look at the contradictions, look at the paradox. This is also where the connection between love and resistance comes in. Love can be a prison, love knots, but it can also be a prison break. That far older, 200,000, 300,000 years, that aspect of our heritage is one of equality. So we draw on love for our dreams of a better world. And we do resist by force, by running away if we can, by hiding in Sherwood Forest with wearing Lincoln green, by creating other stories and alternative ideologies which celebrate what we share, our similarities, our commonalities as human beings. This is where the golden rule comes in, the do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And indeed the more recent socialist golden rule, from each according to their ability and to each according to their need. So this is us. This is who we are. We're disposed over a very, very long history, hundreds of thousands of years, to love and equality. But in class societies, we are riven by violence and division, and yet we resist inequality wherever we can. And in any given, and at any given point in time or at any given place, everything depends on the balance of power. The environment, the ecology, economy change, new technologies come along, things change. And when things change, ruling elites can and do lose control. Sometimes they are taken out by other bullies. Sometimes they're brought down by ordinary people who rise up and burn those palaces down.
Okay, that's parts 1 and 2 of the book. There are 2 more parts to mention here, only briefly, because we're running out of time. Part 3, we call The Hunger Games. We borrow that title from Susan Collins and Jennifer Lawrence. And part 3 tells stories from different moments in history, moments of a public theater of cruelty, like the Hunger Games. These are moments of gendered and sexualized cruelty, and they're designed to terrify the audience, to scare the living hell out of crowds of people, and to repress a restless population, just like the Hunger Games. And at the same time, these are also stories of gendered and sexualized resistance, again, just like the Hunger Games. So we tell the story of how Native Americans overthrew the ancient kingdom of Cahokia on the Mississippi, Cahokia with its ceremonial human sacrifice of young women. And after that overthrowing, the same people lived in the central Midwest of what is now the United States, and they lived with equality, in gender diversity, with gendered tolerance for the next 4 centuries, until the Europeans arrived. Another chapter tells the story of how a 16-year-old girl in medieval France became a trans prophet of peasant revolt. We all know something of Joan of Arc's story, but in this book we pay particular attention to her clothes and how and why they were so transgressive. Another chapter tells the story of 4 British seamen in the Royal Navy who were hanged in 1797. They were hanged for leading a mutiny of hundreds of their shipmates in support of 2 sailors who had been court-martialed for having sex with each other. And we look at how the torture of Iraqi men by Americans at Abu Ghraib prison in 2003, how that torture was gendered and sexualized, and how interrogation became collective rape. And we look too at the terrified courage of one American lesbian prison guard who exposed all that torture.
In each of these stories, the Hunger Games, we're demonstrating a method. What we're saying is that if you want to understand about economic inequality, well, then look at gender, look at sexuality, and suddenly a great deal is illuminated, and vice versa. If you want to understand relations about sex and gender, look at the material aspects of class. Look at what work is being done, by whom, and who's benefiting. And then these ideas about sex habits and ideas and habits about sex and gendering also begin to make a great deal of sense. It turns out that this method certainly is really good at making sense of the long histories of sexism and misogyny and homophobia, and why and when these change. So why do same-sex marriages suddenly become possible at the end of the 20th century? It's a really good question. Why is there now this wonderful new emphasis on trans and non-binary forms of gendering? Again, a really good question. But equally, it asks us to ask, why is this new focus on abortion? What accounts for the rise of incels or TERFs? Why the racist far right of Putin or Trump or Suella Braverman, why are they so homophobic? Why are they so transphobic? These, again, are very good questions. And working with this method actually really works.
It does. Okay, we end Why Men in part 4, and here we're going to get very fast. In part 4, we look at 4 important thinkers who all naturalized inequality between men and women. 2 of them you may be surprised at, Charles Darwin and Friedrich Engels, and 2 are to be expected, Steven Pinker and Napoleon Chagnon. But we look also at the important work of the trans woman and eminent biologist Joan Roughgarden, who has developed a scientific theory that explains many things, including the importance of same-sex sex in animal evolution and in human evolution. In following Joan Roughgarden, we are in effect trying to queer the savannah. So here we're coming close to the end. Act 1 was our first adaptation. It was the creation of human equality and gendered equality through sharing and beating back the bullies. Act 2 was the creation of human inequality after the invention of agriculture.
And gendered inequality.
And gendered inequality, and the triumph of the bullies.
And there's another adaptation coming. Act 3 is climate change. It will be the third great adaptation. The ecology is changing, and all of society will change in response. We just don't yet know how. So we are entering the mother of all struggles. And what we would like you to take from this book are 4 points. First, humans once created equality. Inequality is not inevitable. The differences between men and women that we see now are not innate. And third, in confronting climate change, we will have to confront all the cruelty of class society, and the thugs may win. But throughout human history, there's also been resistance, love, fairness, focusing on sameness, not differences, have all fed that resistance. And so it is just possible that love may win. We'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is the one disadvantage of not being in person, is that we can't kind of salute you with a warm, rapturous round of applause, but I'm sure that people are applauding virtually. That was absolutely wonderful. I really, really enjoyed that exposition on the book. We have some comments in the question and answers already, so I'll have a look. They are mainly compliments at this point. Somebody says, "You rock." Somebody else has said, "It's a beautiful presentation." So I'll give people, you know, a minute just to kind of have a think and process and see if any questions come up. And otherwise, I definitely have a few that I could ask as well. Okay, so we have our first question from somebody who prefers to remain anonymous. They say, "Thank you, that was fascinating. Do you have examples of more equal societies since the advent of civilization?"
It's a good question. It's one we've tried to tackle in the book. Yes, there are contemporary societies who live on the margins of civilization and still manage to hide in the forest or sit on the top of a mountain or live in a jungle and remain more or less equal, exactly as we have the kind of records of near contemporary hunters and gatherers from the last century. So yes, those are they, but we also see the drama, the dialectical experience of people who become more or less equal, as in our own society. Things change, it's not constant. There's not a single way of being unequal. It's always in tension.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
We have another appreciation post. Shani wants to say, "Wonderful, thank you. No question, but wanted to let you know how appreciated your presentation has been."
Wow, thank you.
And we have a question from Dominique Healy, who asks, "What evidence did you have to say why or how the early humans got rid of bullies?"
Okay, we rely on a primatologist and anthropologist, an important thinker called Bohm. And what he did was he went back through the reliable, detailed accounts we have of people who are living by hunting and gathering in the 20th century. And he found
19th and 20th.
And the 19th and 20th. And he went through the 48 most reliable and detailed from places all over the world. And what he found was that in 24 of them, they mentioned a case where the whole community had come together to kill a bully. And it nearly always worked in the same way, which was that people talked together among themselves about doing this. And they went to everybody in the band except the person they were going to kill, and they cleared it with every other adult. And they cleared it with the relatives of the person they were going to kill, that this had to be done. And he found this in 24 of the 48 ethnographies. He says that in any one society, this wasn't very common. It was usually illegal in the law of the country where it happened. And that this was not a thing that people were likely to tell a visiting anthropologist or a settler about. So he thinks it was in many more than 24. It was an extreme case. That's the evidence we have.
Well, that's part of the contemporary evidence. It's also about the rules for sharing, which are enormously important and immensely complicated. The ones for East African sort of cattle people actually look like a butcher's chart. Grandma gets the ear and somebody else gets the tongue, and the left forefront goes to Uncle John. It's immensely complicated, and people stick to those rules. But I think it's also important to say there is the archaeological record, which doesn't show inequality in terms of the very proto-humans and early humans. The people that we know about now because of the very good science actually show that bone size and so forth are remarkably constant among a population. In other words, they're all eating pretty much the same. And the minute you get to class societies, people who are evidently enslaved, for instance, have much, much poorer nutrition, dentation, and so forth. I mean, so there's
bad teeth.
Yeah, bad teeth, but all kinds of other stuff too. It's really interesting, the range of things that one can make sense of to see this difference that comes in with class society.
Great, thank you so much. We have a question about the starting point for your research. So the question is, did you begin with a belief in the power of love connection as a fundamental to humans?
We've been together a long time, and nearly 30 years, and we've been writing together since we started this book about a decade ago. So we've kind of hung in there.
And I believed in the transforming power of love when I was a child.
Yes, yeah. So I think that's been very important about how we've tried to live our lives, and it's also what we love in each other. So yeah.
But the other answer is, we wanted to find a way of making a materialist sense of what we did know, because we both studied anthropology, was that some societies had gender equality and some didn't. And we wanted to make a sense of that, a materialist sense, because I think now that we're facing climate change, we have to have a materialist sense of everything. And then we went back, and we could see in the work that the people who were studying evolution and primates were doing, they were telling us about the importance of love.
And sharing. I mean, and this childcare and the sexual changes that took place to make better sex a lot better. But I think it's also, from my point of view, from both of our points of view, we also are good historians, committed to being good historians, and you want to know about change. It's so obvious that comparatively people are very different, things change within a single society and so forth, and to have a kind of causal explanation that helps you to make sense of the changes that go on was enormously important to us. So both the anthropology and the history, I think, and the personal connections come together.
Thank you so much. And that what you said initially really chimes with what your last message about, love may win. It kind of really speaks to your belief in the transformative power of love. So thank you. We have another question on your point about mothers engaging in infanticide more than fathers in humans. And the question is specifically about, is that still true when accounting for the fact that mothers are primary caretakers? And why do you think that is?
You want to answer this?
No, it's not quite still true. If you go back to very traditional ways of living,
Mm.
what you discover is in quite a lot of infanticide. And that infanticide is economically driven.
Mm.
It's when there's a band of hunters or farmers or whatever who simply don't have enough food to feed any more children.
Mm.
And that infanticide is done by women, done by mothers, not any other women.
Mm.
And it's
to protect the living children.
It's to protect the living children. And that's quite common when people are living economically quite close to the edge. More recently, there's a brilliant book by Nancy Shepherd Hughes about people living in great poverty in Brazil, in a city in Brazil, where women and men kind of allowed some of their children to die of diseases when they had too many children. I think,
again, the same
that's
thing.
more common than we admit. There is desperate people killing children now. There are men who kill their children or somebody else's child. There are very occasionally women who do it for some of the same reasons that people commit domestic murders and so on.
Or become alcoholics and go mad.
But we do have to say that the overwhelming majority of the killing of babies, which happens in the world now, is done by armies.
Yeah. Thank you. We have a set of questions which both ask about the primacy of gender inequality in your argument. So they're both kind of looking at, do we focus on gender inequality first or focus on other forms of inequality? And the specific question on that point is whether you believe that the sexual violence was a driver of further inequality, or whether the emergence of inequality led to the epidemic of sexual violence. So did one cause the other, or did they arise simultaneously?
It's a question that is widely debated, but I think they are part and parcel of the same thing. I think we are sexual creatures, we are social creatures, and we are also potentially violent creatures. So I don't see that they are separable. I think we have a habit of dividing out, and this is part of the ideology that traps us, I think, rather than seeing that if we think of similarities, if we think of this continuum of our adaptation that we've tried to describe, we're kind of all in the same boat, and all of these things are relevant.
Yeah. And also, I think there's an important political lesson, which is that you're lost if you say one kind of inequality is always more important than the other kinds. We've been climate activists for 20 years together, and we've published quite a lot on that, as well as now we're doing a lot of work on Me Too, on resistance to sexual violence. And the thing about climate change and sexual violence and the people in power who enable sexual violence is that there's really only one really important overlap, which is that the people who are responsible for both of these things are the same people. We have the same set of enemies there. And I think it's the question of which is more important to you, any one of us, is a question of our personal experiences, what kind of violence we've faced, what kind of racism, what kind of wars, what kind of poverty. It's different people.
Well, but also these are different cultural histories.
These are different cultural histories.
So, yeah.
And these things happen to you together. It's never that just one of them happens to you, almost never. But I think we do think that the driving thing for the inequality from the top is that what matters most to the people at the top is the economic inequality.
Is that they stay on top.
That's what matters most.
And they
to
don't
them.
give a damn how they're going to do that. I mean, what we're seeing is the kind of ruthlessness. That's what we're seeing in the racist right now, for instance. It is a not caring about what happens to other people. And that hurts people who are on welfare. It hurts in terms of healthcare. It hurts in terms of the actual violence, police violence, imprisonment, and so forth. There are a whole range of ways that these kick in together. And these are then racialized, they're part of a sectarian debate and so forth. But it's those people wanting to stay on top and knowing that people hate them for that because it's so unfair. And there is no innate reason why they should be in the palaces or anyplace else.
Yeah, so in a way, because it's such a fragile position that they're trying to maintain. Yeah. It takes more work to maintain that position through inequality. So we have time for just a couple more questions. We have one from Sahana. Hi, Sahana. Thank you so much for really piquing my interest in this book. More curiosity. In talking about inequality, how would you also talk about power, its processes and movement in human relationships and its transformations over time? How would you say power, adds to or subtracts from your conception of violence?
Well, I think we know that people dominate other people become submissive, and it can be a psychological power over people, it can be physical violence. So there's, again, I would want to step back from using power as an abstract noun, as if it's a thing, because it seems to me that it is embedded in relationships. Can be very different in one place than the next, but the consequences can be the same, that someone is submissive and someone dominates and has better food or lives in a better palace. So it's, to me, power in itself, the abstraction is part of the ideological trap that we're in class societies. We think that it's something that can be easily manipulated, whereas in fact, we're looking at the very glue, the very stickum that gives us social relationships in the first place.
And inequality is not an abstract concept either. Inequality is what happens when power is done to you, when you are frightened and made to be submissive. And I think earlier we kind of, when we were talking about the transforming power of love, there is also the transforming power of cruelty. I know people who are coping in their emotional lives with the consequence of things that happened to their grandparents 60 years ago in great episodes of trauma. You can terrify people. And it's in the implementation of that terror that the power and the inequality lie. And the cruelty doesn't have to be done to everybody. It just has to be done in front of everybody so that everybody sees what could happen to you.
Or your children.
So the last couple of questions kind of deal with the origins of that cruelty. One is about, do you have thoughts on how perhaps childhoods characterized by violence and oppression, abuse, lead us on the path to defensive actions and perpetration of violence? And the second question is about the behavior of the elites wanting to stay on top. And how do you think this behavior started if human nature seeks equality?
I think what we were trying to say about proto-humans and our earliest adaptations was that we are primates, and all of our primate cousins have pretty good potential for being violent and being hierarchical and so forth. And we carry that heritage too. I think that's terribly important. 200,000 years isn't enough, however much equality you got, to get rid of those dispositions. I think that's important. What was the other bit of the question?
About childhoods where
right
are characterized by violence and abuse might lead people on the path to perpetrate violence.
Remember the submission.
So sometimes, yes, sometimes, but sometimes suffering in childhood makes you deeply empathic. Everywhere that I've lived in the world, poor people give more to beggars than rich people do. And I think it's not simply it's not simply that some people are very badly treated at Eton. It's
But they are, some of them.
Some of them. It's also that people learn at Eton to cut off their feelings, not to care. And very often you get people who have been generals, who have been statesmen in ruling classes, who have been responsible for great crimes, who are remembered fondly by their grandchildren and their children. That people can be both kind to their own and not to other people. I think also
That's the us and them bit.
I think also when we say equality is part of the hard wiring in us, even more important to us because we're animals, is survival. And when people think, an enormous number of social struggles come down to, do people think that they can be more powerful by combining with the love of other people like them, or do they feel more terrified of the cruelty coming down from the top? And people change depending on what makes more sense for their survival, which of those two.
The security, the safety against the terror.
And that's also, I think that's very important for the question of climate change. I think climate change is about survival. And I think that we evolved in all the ways we did and made our history because we wanted to survive. That's a hopeful thing and bring to it.
Well, and it's terribly important to remember each time we can do something to actually enhance that, the empathy, which is part of why we're effective, high performing humans and so forth, the better chance we have of getting through what's going to be coming down the pike.
It's a good way to end. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
I really appreciated the timely reminder that inequality is not inevitable, especially given the kind of global context of large-scale bullying, I guess we could call it. And so I've really appreciated going away with that message tonight. So thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. And thank you also to our audience members for some really great thought-provoking questions. If we were in person, you would be getting a very warm round of applause again to thank you. Just to remind our audience that there is a recording of the event that will be available on the Festival of York Ideas YouTube channel, and that can be accessed from the Watch Again section of the festival. You will get an email notification when this is available to view. And also there's been a note in the chat about purchasing Jonathan and Nancy's book, Why Men? A Human History of Violence and Inequality. It's available from the festival's partner bookseller, Fox Lane Books, and that's at foxlanebooks.co.uk. So thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Thank you once again to Nancy and Jonathan. And yes, everyone have a good evening.
Thank you all. Thank you.